Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining right on time. We'll just begin promptly. Let's give others, say, a minute to join, but we'll be beginning shortly. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for this webinar. And we'll be spending the next 1 hour or so talk you through, some exciting pieces of content that we've put together, which is the landscape scans. So as we wait for the rest to join, my name is Mercy Mangeni. I am a senior venture builder with the Jobtech Alliance, which we'll be talking through in a minute. So if you do have access to your chat button down on your screens, please feel free to introduce yourself using the chat function, your name, organization, and where you're from. So how we'll divide the next 1 hour or so is that we'll walk you through sort of the content that we've put together, and then you get to hear from some of the people that helped us put this together and helped us review some of these landscape scans. But before we do so, what is the Jobtech Alliance? Now, the Jobtech Alliance is an ecosystem building initiative around inclusive job tech in Africa. But you may be wondering, what's inclusive job tech? So basically, job tech is digital platforms that connect people to work opportunities. So think about your gig matching platforms, your job matching platforms, your e-commerce marketplaces, your ride-hailing apps, among others. So any platform that is able to connect people to work opportunities, that can then be said to be a job tech platform. But because this sector is quite nascent, we did come up with a framing, to sort of guide the sector in terms of what sector interventions are required or there are. And we came up with about 5, sectors within our, taxonomy. And I'm sure, our job tech taxonomy will be shared to you via chat. And there are 5 categories. So the first is really, platforms for offline work. You'd hear probably the World Bank refer to this as location-based platforms. So they're basically, your ride-hailing apps, your home services apps, or cleaning platforms or care services platforms. Now, this is where, work is mediated online, but is then delivered offline. Then the second category we have is platforms for digitally delivered work. So in layman's terms, basically these are platforms where work is mediated and delivered online. So think about your Fivers or your Upworks and many more. And there's various subcategories in this. So we have, the skilled online freelancing, the X1 platforms, managed services, and many, many more. Then you have your digital services for micro enterprises. So basically, these are platforms that help increase the efficiencies of different businesses and optimize their operations. So these are e-commerce marketplaces, business management tools, among others. Our fourth taxonomy or category within the taxonomy is tech-enabled skilling. Basically, these are edtech platforms that equip people, with the opportunity to work. So this could be course-guided or cohort-based learnings, on demand, so /self-paced learning, and many, many more. And then lastly, we have digital tools for work enablement. So those are the 5 categories within our taxonomy that we are guided by. And we've used the same framing to sort of put together our landscape scans. So our landscape scans really are within these 5 categories within our taxonomy. And you may be asking yourself, so what's basically a landscape scan? So in our context, the landscape scans basically are primers for any actors within this space. So you could be a donor, you could be an entrepreneur or a platform, you could be someone from the developmental space. So any actor that is interested within the job tech space, you can download these landscape scans, which will sort of summarize some of the common business models that we're seeing within the space, who the key actors are, if you're seeing any sector trends across all these 5 categories, but basically to sort of give you sort of a primer for you to understand the sector better. So that's what we are launching today. But because we only have an hour to do so, we'll be launching the landscape scans for the first 2, but I'd encourage all of us to go and download and read through all the 5 categories. So let's start with the first one, platforms for offline work. Now, again, as I mentioned earlier, platforms for offline work are basically platforms where work is mediated online, but is delivered offline. For instance, your ride-hailing apps, your courier services apps, and many, many more. And some of the key business models that we're seeing within this space, and before I even move to some of the key business models, is what we're seeing in this space is the first wave of job tech platforms in Africa, at least from our experience, was generally driven by jobs boards. Now, jobs boards are basically platforms that would ideally match different workers or different users to employment opportunities, more often white collar opportunities. And now that has then since morphed into sort of gig matching platforms, where we have platforms that are able to match people to gig work. So that was the first wave of job tech platforms within this category. Then the second wave was really driven by, the offline work in Africa. And as you know, currently in Africa, almost 80+% of employment is informal or through the informal labor markets. And so digitizing these informal labor markets has sort of driven the second wave of platforms for offline work, where you have different tools or different platforms that help digitize, micro enterprises. And it's continuing to considerably expand within the content, particularly in urban and peri-urban areas. Typically, what we see with these platforms, they're generally satellite. So take, for instance, in the case of Uber, generally the driver comes with their car or with their asset. So the platform really is utilized to mediate work, where then the driver can get opportunity to work. So generally such platforms tend to be very asset light, where the work is then mediated, and as such, it's very attractive in terms of positioning and in terms of scale. So if you think about, how these platforms have been able to scale within this, continent, then there's a case to be made there. So that, some of the trends that we are seeing within this category, and there's many more that we've highlighted within the landscape scans itself. Now, the business models that are quite common within this space are 5 or so, but I'll highlight the first 3, and then we can, you can read through the rest in the landscape scan. So what we are seeing is the listing fee model, where either the employer or a service provider, pays to list or promote a service within, or service/vacancy within their platform. Mostly common within gig marketplaces. And in some cases, even some jobs boards platforms also have this or have adapted this business model. The other one is the 1, 2, or multi-sided commission fee, where you pay a commission, or a commission is taken off from the transactions that suppliers, consumers, or third parties are paying, to sort of be a revenue model for the platform. And then subscription model or subscription fee, which is sort of self-explanatory, where you pay or consumers pay a flat fee or a variable fee in terms of subscription, based on the frequency of use, either annually, monthly, etc. So those are some of the, the key business models that we've seen within this category. Now, there's various opportunities and, of course, challenges that exist within this, within this sector as well. So the first key opportunity that we've seen is these platforms generally tend to have opportunities to layer on benefits and other securities for their workers/users. And the idea for layering on is to increase retention of the users or workers on the platform and reduce churn within the platform. So we are talking benefits such as insurance, training, and support. In some instances, we've even seen some other platforms provide assets, assets to their users or workers. Just to give you an example, for those who are familiar with Safe Border in Uganda, I think this is a platform that just recently partnered with a microinsurance firm or platform to to provide affordable life and healthcare insurance to their users, so that they're able to increase stickiness of their users or their riders on the platform. So that's one key opportunity that we are seeing within the sector. The other is, the super apps and vertically integrated platforms. I think super apps is growing fast within the sector. And, many platforms in the past couple of, years have adapted this. And particularly we are seeing this within the ride-hailing app space. So for instance, if you think about, Little Cabs, now Little Cabs started as a ride-hailing platform, but has since integrated other sort of interfaces and has become a super app. So that's another, example or in terms of opportunity that we could point out. But what we are increasingly seeing is vertically integrated platforms are also increasing within this space, where platforms choose to go deep, to address the users' needs. So they go deep within that value chain, so that they're able to create opportunities for stickiness and also increase monetization within that value chain. So those are some of the opportunities we see within this sector. Similarly, of course, there are challenges. For instance, one of the key challenges we see is the role that these platforms play as market creators. Now, one of the biggest questions that these platforms face or have to deal with is, the question around scale versus customer demand, right? So generally, particularly in Africa, the question is there enough customer demand to sort of drive scale for such platforms? So whereas, and what we are seeing is there's a bit of insufficient demand to create huge platforms within the sector. So I think that's one key question that, platforms within this category have to deal with. The other is fairness of platforms to platform workers. And I think if you're familiar with the Fair Work Project, I think Fair Work Project usually analyzes different platforms for offline work, and generally they really rank low in terms of fairness, bringing into question whether they follow the 5 tenets of fairness in terms of worker representation, fairness in income, etc. So that's one of the key questions that we've seen platforms within this category struggle with, and there's many more that you can read on within the landscape scans. Now, the second category is platforms for digitally delivered work. And as mentioned earlier, so these are platforms where work is mediated online and similarly delivered online as well. And we gave examples earlier of Upwork, Fiverr, and many more. Now, similarly here, what we're seeing is, freelancing is sort of driving this category forward, where, skilled service providers are using platforms to deliver their work, either in terms of content creation, graphic design. And so we are seeing a lot of, say, BPO or ITO, BPO meaning business process outsourcing, or ITO models coming up. So that's one of the key trends that we've seen in this market. Another is micro work is also gaining prominence within the sector. So initially, based on what we saw, initially this was focused on transcription and content moderation, but that has since evolved. And especially as we speak and discuss about AI and data annotation, this is a sector or category that we'll see evolve in future. And again, as mentioned, BPO, ITO spaces are also emerging as, sectors that we are seeing within this category. Now, again, there's different opportunities and challenges within the sector. The first one that I could highlight is the significant role of government in the sector. I think what different governments are realizing is that there's potential, the potential for digitally delivered work to deliver, work for unemployed youth, particularly in Africa. So just to give you a good example is, for instance, here in Kenya, we have a program called a Jira digital program, which helps cultivate, digital skills for youth and then able to match them to work opportunities. So we are increasingly seeing, governments play a big role in this sector. Then another opportunity we're seeing is the model where, platforms have to hire, train, and deploy. So within this category, you cannot necessarily undermine the role that upskilling plays, especially because, matching of skills is matched to international clients more often than not. So to give you a good example here is for those of us who are familiar with Andela. Andela is sort of a platform that would hire, train, and then deploy this skill set. So those are some of the opportunities that we're seeing in this category as well. Similarly, there's a couple of challenges, say for instance, the lack of market parity in terms of pay levels. And this is where we see, winner takes all phenomena where, different users are paid higher depending on their rates, on their rating, the credentials. And so if you're a new user entering into the space, there's that likelihood of having market parity in terms of the income you earn through this platforms. And again, just to emphasize, there's many more opportunities and challenges that we've highlighted within the landscape scans. Please feel free to download and go read through them in much more detail. But don't take my word for it. As I said earlier, we do have, a set of different panelists that helped us review, put together this landscape scans. And I think it would be important to hear from them directly on what this entails. So I'll invite Wairimu to take us through the next section of this webinar. Wairimu?
Thank you so much, Mercy, for giving us an overview of those two landscape scans and of showing us, of course, the opportunities that are there in the job tech space that we probably would not even have thought about before, So my name is Wairimu Gitahi. I'm the Insights and Impact Manager for Jobtech Alliance, and very happy to be moderating this session with a very powerful panel. So before we go on, I'd like to invite each panel member to introduce themselves. Tell us your name, what you do, and what your company does. I'll start with Justin.
Hi, my name is Justin Norman. I run a media business called The Flip. We have a podcast, and the last season of the podcast explored the future of work. It's a question I'm very interested in the African context, and I think through that work I've become a good friend of the Jobtech Alliances. So I'm glad to be here, and thanks for organizing.
And we are very grateful for your friendship. Thank you, Justin. And Annabelle?
Thanks, Wairimu. Hi, everyone. I'm Annabelle Angwenyi, co-founder and CEO at Ziada. At our core, Ziada is a platform that links service providers with service consumers, but Ziada means extra in Swahili. So of course, we're doing a bit bonus. And the extras are tool rental, and we also offer business advice to our service providers. And coming soon, we are going to offer working capital financing to our service providers. Thanks, everyone.
Right. Thank you. Joseph?
Thank you, Wairimu. My name is Joseph Rutakhangwa. I run a startup called Ruazi, which is a market intelligence platform helping multinational companies access consumer data from emerging markets. This is data on who is buying what products, from where, when, and why, and at what price to help these companies expand and drive revenue. And the way we get the data, we utilize a network of local consumers. We call them mappers. Right now, we're spread across 60 countries in Africa, South America, as well as South Asia. They use our mobile application and web app to log purchases when they are at retail outlets buying products, and also to log their consumption at home. And they get paid for verified logs. And that way, we solve the massive unemployment and underemployment problem across the continent.
Thank you, Joseph. And finally, Janet.
Thank you, Irimo. Good evening, everyone. My name is Janet Wandia, the Gender and Job Tech Lead at Jobtech Alliance. So what that means is that my main role in Jobtech Alliance is to ask everyone, including our platform members, the ecosystem, and the business itself, what about the women?
Thank you very much. So let's take a deep dive into discussing about the future of work. So I'll start with you, Justin. On your podcast, The Flip, you speak a lot about the future of work, the job tech space. What's the role of digitally delivered and offline work platforms? What role do they play in the ever-evolving space in this job tech space in Africa?
Yeah, I think my interest in the future of work stems just from this sort of overwhelming demographics question in the African context. I think a stat that I like to share is that the African countries will add more people to the workforce than the rest of the world combined in the next 10 years. And so, obviously, I think everyone on this webinar believes that job tech has an important role to play, and job tech platforms have an important role to play in addressing, the need for job creation. Then the question becomes, what role will platforms for offline work play versus platforms for digitally delivered work? And how I like to think about it is really, platforms for offline work, such as Uber, are locally delivered jobs where the opportunity is to some extent constrained by the size and the scope of the local market, whereas platforms for digitally delivered jobs, and this could be BPO, outsourcing call centers, it could be, data annotation, anything where, digital platforms are used to connect people to opportunities anywhere in the world. That's not necessarily constrained by local consumption. It is creating, theoretically, global opportunities for anybody. But, in that case, then Africans are competing with, other emerging markets for, those types of work opportunities. So, I'm particularly excited by platforms for digitally delivered work, and, maybe Andela being kind of the most famous or infamous one in the African context, because we know that more people are entering the workforce than the number of local jobs are being created. So if we are expecting, platforms to make a meaningful dent in this workforce question, then jobs are going to have to come from other countries and not just locally. So I'll pause there. I know there's a lot of considerations that we'll talk about, but theoretically, platforms for digitally delivered work should play an important role in income generation and job creation opportunities across the continent.
Sure. Thank you very much. So let's go on to this topic of business models. Mercy talked about the various business models that digitally delivered and offline work platforms use. And there are various kinds, like the commission model, there's the subscription model. So I wanted to ask Annabelle, what model does your business use and why did you choose this specific model?
Right. So at Ziada, we're using the pay-per-lead model. And I think the best way to explain what this model is with a very simple example. So you've got Werimo, who is a person who's looking for a plumber, and there's Annabelle, who's the plumber. So Werimo will come to a platform and they'll identify the person who meets their need, whether it's because of their location or whatever proficiencies that they said they specialize in. And they'll fill in a bit of a snippet on what their need is. So if like your sink is leaking, you just do a very short snippet of what your problem is, and you send it out to the service provider that you've identified. Now the service provider sees that snippet that you've given, and they have your location in our instance, but they don't have your details. They have no other details other than what your problem is. So to unlock you as a lead, they pay Ziada. And then we give them your contact details, and everything after that is between yourself and the service provider. We arrived at this model after, I think, quite a bit of trial and error. So I think from exposure and from experience, what we tend to gravitate towards is commission model when you think about mostly marketplaces. And that's what we started off with, until we realized that a lot of our very popular services were not fitting within the mold of commissions. And for us, we launched during COVID, so very specifically was a need looking for M-Pesa agents. And we launched during COVID, so there was a lot of disruption around where the locations were. But it was not fair on either of on anyone's front, whether it was the service provider or the other's front, to ask how much are you transacting within your M-Pesa so that we can get a commission of that. Nobody was going to disclose that. But it was, we felt like we were missing out on such a big opportunity, because at the time it was our second most popular sought out service, and it just wasn't sitting under the commission model. So we did a bit of benchmarking courtesy of the accelerator that we got into with the Catalyst Fund. And we did this globally with all the companies that are similar to Ziada. And we decided that pay-per-lead model would work well, not only for the job matching platform, but also the extras that I mentioned, because commission was also not going to work well for something like the tour rental service, nor the business advisory, because it also had a lot of moving parts with a lot of variables that we just did not have the capacity at the time to put under the commission umbrella. So we decided upon the pay-per-lead model probably.
All right, thank you. I think what we're getting from there is that sometimes it has to be a trial and error process for you to get there. Joseph, what about you? What model is your company using, and why did you settle on that model?
Yeah, so we have a B2B SaaS platform where, these multinational companies subscribe to access, a dashboard that has the analytics and insights on the brands they're tracking from the region, like a geographic location. So whether it's a city or a country with multiple cities or multiple countries and multiple cities, and across the number of consumers that are subscribing to see their purchases and patterns. The reason we ended up with a normal subscription, enterprise subscription model is because it's the one that's easier to, from an operational perspective, it's easier to predict. It's easier to work with when you're running sales, especially enterprise sales. Earlier on, we had a model which was like like pay per data acquisition, where the same thing you'd find on Facebook ads or Google ads or any of those. But the problem with that is it's difficult for companies to, you're just lengthening the sales cycle, because then you're putting all those decisions onto your buyer on deciding, how much data volume they would want, how many regions they would want to cover from the get-go, and so forth. So just to cut that down, we decided we'll just do a normal subscription where you have fixed packages, and then you have like a larger custom package where you can just now have more control on adding countries, changing the number of countries and brands that you want to track and so forth. So that's an easier thing to work with, and reduced our sales cycles from like 6 months to 3 months. So that's what we picked. Now, in that, the companies most of these companies already have presence across emerging markets. They're larger companies, $100 million plus, and they don't interact with mappers. So from the side of consumers, the consumers get paid. We use dynamic pricing where they get paid based on their location, based on the volume of subscribers' needs for data from their area and the products that they're tracking, as well as the concentration of other consumers in their region or city. So it's dynamic pricing on that end, but it mostly adds up to, if they're earning, so we're talking here underemployment or even normal employment, the earning would be like 5 to 10% of their normal salary. If they're not earning, that's a good amount that they can live off of. So that's the general that's the general model that we have.
Thank you. So from paper data acquisition to subscription model, because it's easier to work with.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some challenges in this market. We know very well that in 2030, there'll be about 100 million youth that will enter the labor market in Africa. And of these 30 to 88 million of young Africans will enter the job tech space. So obviously there are some challenges that come with this. And I wanted to know from you, Annabelle, are there some challenges that you're already experiencing, and how are you dealing with these challenges?
Yeah, of course. I wish there was a model that came without challenges, but yeah, definitely. And I think for us, the biggest one is not with the technical skills per se of our service providers, but more so like the soft skills that should come hand in hand with the technical skills that a lot of them have, or sometimes not even technical skills, because with our platform, anyone can join. So with the disruptions also, we find ourselves becoming, we find Ziada becoming more popular whenever there's disruptions. So we launched during COVID when people were losing their jobs, unfortunately, and like right now when the economy is doing whatever the economy is doing globally. So we're finding people just coming in to like fill the gaps that like job losses have brought in. So when somebody comes in who has not had the exposure of running the business in any capacity, whether it's a one-man show or like running a business with X number of people, there's a lot of gaps. And unfortunately, those gaps from the consumer side are looked at as gaps that Ziada has, not necessarily that the service provider has. So with our service providers, mostly it's around like the soft skills around them offering services to the consumers. How to talk to consumers, something as simple as how to call them, like what to say when you call them, because I think we have a bit of a problem. I'll say in Kenya specifically, where there's some, I was looking for a diplomatic word, but there's a bit of rudeness and some people call you on the phone. They ask you something like, what do you want? They haven't introduced themselves. They haven't, like, there's no, it's very rough. And that's what we're seeing is contributing to them getting low ratings and then not getting more jobs that follow up. So we're struggling with the soft skills. And I think secondly is pricing. Again, because people are coming in due to disruptions, they're not like seasoned business people. They don't know how to price their services. So you get a lot of guys saying they offer a service, and when they're asked how much do you charge, how much should I pay you for this, they say whatever you see fit. And that's not a price. It brings in friction from both sides. They don't really mean whatever you see fit. They just also don't know what the work of their hands, what that should be priced at. So those are two things that we're seeing as really big challenges. And one of the reasons we're offering business advisory so that we can kind of guide them on how to price their services as they traverse the Ziada and the extended service landscape.
Okay, so pricing and the issue of soft skills, upskilling them. Thank you so much. Joseph, your company is obviously digitally delivered in the digitally delivered sector. So are you facing any challenges that are specific to this sector and perhaps different from what Annabelle has spoken about?
Yes, I think we have a couple of, so we have two groups that we target before I get to challenges. So the first group is when we start targeting in every city and country, we start with people who have graduated from college. So we have huge unemployment in Africa in different brackets. For us, the top bracket is people who have graduated from college and they don't have jobs. Mostly in Africa, it take about 3 to 5 years before you get employment after graduation. Mm-hmm. And that's not counting, that's counting both, underemployment and being employed in the formal sector. The second group is people who did get employment, but they're underemployed. We see this a lot. We've captured a lot of data on people's salaries and where they work and their education and so forth. And there's a massive unemployment population, especially in countries like Nigeria, where you can have a master's degree and get paid $100 a month. Now, if you control that for how much people earn in general in the country, then it looks like it's okay. But if you scale that out through the continent, then you see that it's they're heavily underemployed. The way we approach that is, we capture that group first based on, the earning potential, the current earning or earning potential through the lifetime based on the brand's perspective, like the multinationals. The challenge that we see, operationally, the first one is language. So we later found out that actually in countries that are English speaking, so we have English speaking, French speaking, and then Portuguese like Angola and Mozambique in Africa, and then Arabic in North. But even in English-speaking countries like Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria, the English comprehension, like if you do US English or UK English in the app, doesn't really work, right? So the comprehension levels aren't what you'd suspect. So they're much, much lower. And the challenge there was, okay, so what do? Do you now, retarget and go for a population that has a higher proficiency in the languages based on how you're capturing the data? But we decided to roll out more languages in the app. So now we have more than 50 languages. So we'll get local languages like Luganda and Kinyarwanda and so forth to enable the capturing of other consumers who are not proficient in common languages like French and English, but they have a good earning potential. They're consuming these products and so forth to be able to enable them to comfortably log their purchases and consumption. And also the other problem that we have, this is an infrastructure problem, is payouts. So, despite what most people believe, you see a lot of like fintech solutions across the world and across Africa. There's only one company that correctly does payouts, cross-border payouts in Africa, and that's Flutterwave. All other companies can't solve it. And Flutterwave, so we are dependent on Flutterwave's capacity to run payouts through different channels. So this is mobile, money, and banks. And we're just dependent on the countries that Flutterwave can cover because no other solution can, do what Flutterwave does. And that's a massive problem. In the beginning, you won't think of payouts as a massive problem if you're operating at least in one country. But when you start covering all sorts of countries, Congo, Central African Republic, Mozambique, Angola, Zimbabwe, which is extremely difficult to pay out to, then you find out that, there isn't a solution that's actually covering payouts. And then for us, it's even, more difficult because now we have India and Bangladesh and South America and so forth. So for us, those two are primary problems. We have other infrastructural problems such as location. So in Africa, you don't have address systems. You have a good address system for city centers or places. I don't know if the Kenyans use the same term, but in Tanzania, we have a term uzunguni, which is like, like the Westlands or the like. They have good addressing system, but the rest of the everywhere else, like 99% of the locations don't have addresses, and addresses as in the same way you'd find in the US or the UK and the like. So we had to create our own addressing system. So we now have our own infrastructure for addresses. We are creating address system for homes where these consumers are, and also for retail outlets, so that we can for retail outlets, for the brands to be able to deliver products, to be able to run sales and so forth. And for the homes is for us to be able to know where consumers live in relation to where they buy products from, to solve that proximity problem where you see a lot of consumers not being able to find the products they need, in a close proximity from where they live. So yeah, so we have a lot of infrastructure problems that make it possible, that make it difficult for companies to roll out.
Those are interesting points about working on the issue of language proficiency and also of infrastructure, so that to push the business model forward. So thank you so much, Joseph, for that. And now let's talk about a very key issue in this labor market, in this job tech space. And of course, it's the issue of gender. And so I'll direct this question, obviously, first to you, Janet, the gender lead for Jobtech Alliance. I was reading a report from CGAP that says that 70 to 80% of the women in developing countries are quite happy with the job tech space, because obviously it's much safer, it's much flexible, the women need that for work-life balance. They're working on that. But we still see that there are still some barriers, there are still some challenges. What challenges are still there, and how can these challenges be overcome?
I agree by remote, there's still very low participation rate, especially for women in the job tech space. And this is a cause of concern. I mean, if 30 to 88 million youths are going to be in this space by 2030, it's something that we need to think about. But when we speak of challenges, a key thing to have in mind is access. And a simple thing is think of it in terms of barriers to entry. For instance, if a woman wants to drive for Uber or Bolt, it means that she needs to have a car. How many women can be able to afford this car? Also, how is the acquisition model being put forth? So when you have the advertisements, how many times do you see a woman being put in the advertisement? So this means that even it's communicating to the society that this is the kind of job or the kind of people that we want working for this. And if we look at it from another point of view, most of the time, women are also involved in caregiving, which means they can only give a certain amount of time towards this work. So even if they like the fact that it's flexible, remember, these jobs are being paid per gig. So can the woman work long enough for this job to be called a meaningful job? And granted, a lot of these platforms are really thinking about creating these jobs for the gig workers, but they're not really thinking about including everyone. And I agree, because they are really trying to survive. But it's time we begin to start thinking of going out to include the other part of the society that has been forgotten. And not everyone is failing. There are some platforms that are working well. And you see this actually for digitally delivered work. This is like the business processing, outsourcing, and the job boards. They're actually being able to have better inclusivity. And this is mostly being driven by the customers and the investors who would commonly ask for women due to the soft skills, or they would ask the companies to be intentional about having a balance. And so the rest of the ecosystem can be able to quickly learn from this and see how they can be able to benefit from having more women on their platforms.
Thank you very much. So Joseph, I can see your side of things. Digitally Delivered is doing some good things for women there. Perhaps Annabelle, you guys need to fill up your socks.
So we're not too badly off.
You're not too badly off.
We're 38% of our service providers are women, and we're very intentional about adding it. So we're not too bad.
So things will get better in the future, no? All righty. So let's go to Justin now. Justin, let's talk about trends. What are some of the trends you see pushing these platforms, both digitally delivered and offline work?
Yeah, I think obviously digital literacy and just increased comfortability with digital platforms is a big one from a user perspective in particular. I think when we look at just the size of the youth population and you know the average age of the working age population across the continent, I think in general, you know, those who are younger may be looking for jobs or looking to do things like freelance on Upwork versus, you know, try to do something more in the local or offline economy. So I think in general, you know, with younger people, they're going to, you know, start looking for utilization of platforms first as opposed to offline. You know, I'm really interested in the context of digitally delivered work, you know, the increased willingness in a post-COVID world, especially of organizations and companies hiring people from outside of their country, and what sort of opportunities it creates to not only sort of outsource to a greater degree, but for a lot of organizations to really consider, you know, in the context of remote work, bringing more, you know, foreign located talent into their workforce, and what sorts of opportunities that creates from a digitally delivered platform perspective. Again, I talked about Andela before, but, you know, Andela for X, right? What are the other sorts of types of companies, types of jobs that people would be willing to hire outside of their country, and what sorts of platforms can connect the labor to those opportunities. And then I think just in general, you know, Joseph earlier talked about infrastructure and payouts and those sorts of things. And I think, you know, while I won't say that, you know, the infrastructure problems are fully solved, I know that they certainly are. And I think the more that we talk about and focus on a lot of these inherent barriers, payments being a big one of them, you know, I think, you know, hiring, regulation, all of these things, the more that we focus on and talk about them, the easier it'll become to connect to opportunities. And, you know, I think it's a slow road to getting there, but, you know, we are, I think, trending in the right direction in terms of there actually being solutions to many of these existential and infrastructural problems that African talent is facing at present.
Sure. So infrastructure, payouts, policies will make the whole job tech space much easier, make it more inclusive, and increase more opportunities. All righty. So let's move on to, of course, a question that I must ask. And of course, this is about generative AI systems. So I don't know who I should start with. Let me start with you, Janet. What is your view? How do you see this system playing out in the job tech space, particularly for women?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that is going to come, whether we are prepared for it or not. It is something that is the world is actually moving towards AI. And what does this mean? For women and for the entire fraternity in the job tech world, we need to think about skilling. Are people ready for this transformation? Are we teaching, or are people learning the kind of skills that we'll be able to move towards our job tech women towards AI? And also, of course, when you speak of women, we have to speak of safety. So thinking about data governance, how will this data be protected? How are you going to ensure that any data that is being collected, and especially for a woman, safety is a key concern, is not going to be used for the same, for illegal means, let me put it that way lightly. And yeah, I think that's the major comment I'll put across.
Yeah, thank you. Joseph?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I'm not, like, from my perspective, I don't think the dangers are, as as severe as people are making them seem, because, for instance, like the internet alone, there are 3 billion people in the world who still don't have access to the internet. And the internet is what, 30 years old, 35 years old. So I don't think AI is going to take over the world, or or eat someone. But in terms of like how we're going to utilize this as startups, we just had a workshop with our lawyers last week, and the biggest problem right now for startups is using like it's around copyright infringing, right? So using data you just scrape on the internet, or just use other people's work and then use that you base that to build your systems. I think that's where most of the risks and most of the like legal problems that we're seeing right now already pop up here in the US are based on that, which is an opportunity from my end in the business that we're in. We're in the business of capturing data that doesn't exist online. And I think that's where, participation from, young people in Africa and other emerging markets come in, where we have the opportunity to create our own data repository that we own 100%, have all these, the hundreds of millions of young people around the world who don't have access to the already existing system, have them participate in creating the new data repository, and use that, whatever is created on the other side, use that to their own advantage. And that's what we're doing at Ruazi. We have our own data repository. We are building it further, through our network of local consumers. And, with that, we'll be able to now have, an opposite world. Because if you look at the current platforms, they've just based everything on what's on the internet. And the internet is like 90% US, 10% Europe, if I can just conclude, like summarize, generalize that. So have like an alternative world, which is full of, the context of Africa and then eventually Asia and Latin America. I think that's the opportunity that we have. So this is positive for me.
Okay. So Joseph is telling us generative AI is not going to eat anyone. So let's not be scared. The opportunities are much more than the disadvantages. And then, of course, from Justin, I expect a very pragmatic answer. Go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, I think my answer as it pertains to AI, and I think just new technologies and technological shifts in general, is there always tends to be this reaction and this question about what it's going to do for jobs and to the workforce. But whether we like it or not, these technological changes happen, and I think often they create a lot of new opportunities for those who embrace technology, right? And I don't know that we can have a top-down conversation about, well, AI is bad for jobs or whatever, because it's happening and people are employers, users are going to adopt it. And I think those who benefit, those rather who adopt it the most openly and readily are going to benefit. And I actually think that this is, where African markets can have a comparative advantage. if we just believe that, generally speaking, youthful and digitally native populations can more readily adopt technology, right? Rather than what do we need to teach, but how can we sort of enable the youth to just embrace and to utilize technology, right? I'm in my 30s. I don't think I can really teach young people who are, 16, 18 years old, how to use a cell phone. I think we just need to put cell phones in their hands and let them figure out how to use it in their own way, right? So what does that sort of enablement look like in the context of advancing, rapidly advancing technology? It's here, and let's figure out ways that, African talent can benefit from it. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. So let's embrace it. And, it will be really good in terms of, particularly for young people. Annabelle?
On Ziada's end, since we're a platform for offline jobs, I don't think there's much we can say on that front. We just have to wait for the robots to to take over there. And I think we're at least I hope we're a few years away from that. But I think we can definitely leverage it in helping our service providers turn the leads into actual transactions. So we're seeing where they're struggling, if it's in communication, if it's with some templates so that they're compliant, and we can hold their hand on this journey to becoming formal organizations. Then there's a lot for us to leverage there. But again, still early days, there's a lot we can explore. And we're still trying to figure it out, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of room for exploring. So before we go to the question and answer session, I just wanted to ask Joseph and Annabelle, and perhaps Annabelle, you can just take it first. What do you have in mind in terms of the future of your company?
In the short term, I think our big challenge is around education, and this is both with the upskilling, with the focus on the soft skills, so that Ziada is known for good quality service providers, not only for the technical skills, but also how they relate to you, and also quite largely around the model that we've decided to go with. It was a bit of a gamble to go with it. We knew it would be an uphill task in the short term, but we believe it was the right move to take, mostly as we're growing. So the education around that is priority for us, and we'll continue to do that. And secondly is the introduction of the embedded working capital credit that we're doing with a partner. We're doing it with PesaKit, and it's also it's also come from the feedback from our users, because they were getting stuck at some point. There's areas that we can help them with, and there's areas that we can't, and where we can't, we find partners who can come in and fill in those gaps. And I think the room for collaboration in the Jobtech space is so wide, and it's one of the things that we're trying to do, starting with working capital.
Okay, a good point there about getting feedback from your users to move forward. Joseph?
Yeah, for us, the quick one is getting to 1 million consumers next year, by the end of next year, and also opening up our platform to smaller businesses, like mid-market and small businesses, with a self-serve aspect to that. Because right now we only focusing on enterprise, and that's how we became profitable, was just focusing on larger companies. They have operations in many countries, and they have a bigger budget. But now I think it's not fair to exclude, because every business, including a one-man business, has a need for consumer insights to know what demands are in which areas for which products, so they can provide those kind of products. And I think we should democratize that kind of data and insights to all businesses. So we'll be rolling that out next year.
All right, thank you so much. So we'll now move forward to the question and answer session. And I see a question here addressed to Annabelle, to your company, Ziada. And someone is asking, could you talk about some of the initiatives you have around upskilling? Because it's a big challenge for many organizations.
So we started off with working with a professional. He calls himself a reformed fundi. because he struggled with the same soft skills that mostly our skilled tradesmen, who are also our popular category, they struggle with. So we've started with that, and we hold monthly sessions. We put it as an open forum so that there's room for dialogue and for introspection, as opposed to you're doing this wrong and you need to correct it. We found that that works a bit better than kind of like the attack method that we initially had. So yeah, we started off with that, and how we're incentivizing this is by offering tokens. So tokens are our in-app currency. It's what unlocks the lead. And we're able to, if you're able to do a training with our person, then we'll give you 2 tokens, 3 tokens that can increase the likelihood of you getting jobs from people. And it's been 3 months so far, and in 3 months we've got, I think we have good indicators of this. We're trying to figure out how to make it, how to scale it and keep it in-app, because we don't want to be doing monthly face-to-face sessions for the rest of Ziada's useful life. So that's the trajectory, is how to build this into the platform and to keep incentivizing it. And I think that's one of the bigger benefits that we're seeing of the paper lead model, is that we're able to incentivize a lot of behaviors without relying on any other person.
Okay, so I see we are almost out of time. Joseph, do you want to give us just a very short answer about how you see your business model evolving?
Yes. So right now we have a B2B SaaS model. With time, I haven't yet put it in the roadmap, but with time we'll have a paper data model. We'll add that the same way you experience Facebook ads or Google ads, where you pay per, based on the coverage you want and the volume. We'll add that to enable businesses to now flexibly, increase the, some businesses can still use the subscription model. And then on top of that, you can have that paper lead when you want one-offs, or you want to just increase the volume for just a specific period and then take it down again.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for all the information you've shared, the dialogue here. I'll hand it over to Mercy to wrap up this launch session.
Thank you so much, Remo. I think that was quite informative. And thank you all for, sticking with us. I think given what you've had, I think then this should excite you. So we've just launched the landscape scans. We've given you a flavor of what to expect in the first 2, but please feel free to go to our website, which will be shared with you in chat. Download this, 2 and 3 more that we have to help you chew on this content a little bit easier. We did partner or collaborate with BC4A, and the fleet sort of helped us put together an e-learning course that will be launched shortly on the BC4A website. So keep out keep out a look for that. But so far, I think this is what we have. Please feel free to interact with us on our info@jobtechalliance.com. Please feel free to reach out to us if you need any clarification, if you have any questions. We're always happy to address those. But I think that's it from us for today. Thank you so much for joining this session, and we'd like to close this session. So thank you, everybody, and have yourselves a good evening or a good day from wherever you're joining from. Thank you so much.